The service elevator at Ashmore General has a button for every floor the building is willing to admit it has. Ours had one more. For 18 years, I would have sworn to you I never once pressed it. I'm starting here because last Tuesday I found out that was a lie I'd been telling myself without knowing it. My own badge pressed it 409 times. I don't remember a single one of them. Stay with me to the end. Somewhere in the middle, you're going to decide I'm a man who came loose from his own mind, and I can't stop you. But I'm asking you to hold off until the part about the beds. The beds are where I stopped being able to argue myself out of it. Maybe you'll do better than I did. So let me drop you into it the way it dropped into me. You shouldn't have to wait for the fear I didn't get to have. 3 in the morning. Empty building, the service elevator carrying me up from the morgue, and then with no button pressed and no one else in the car, it sinks. Down, past the bottom floor. Past where the building is supposed to end. Down to a place the panel swears isn't there. And it settles with that small sigh in the cable a car only makes when it has reached a real floor. The doors slide open on a corridor lit bright and humming at 3 in the morning, a hallway I have walked this building for 18 years and never once seen. That was the first night. Hold on to it. Now let me tell you who I am, because it only gets worse once you know what I was. The badge says Halloran. The day crew calls me Cal. 18 years on night security at Ashmore General, a regional hospital built in 6 or 7 arguments across 70 years, so the corridors don't meet where they should. The room numbers skip, and every man who trained me said the same thing. My first night, the building is older than the map we have of it. I thought that was just a thing you say about old buildings. I don't think that anymore. Here's the shape of the job, because it matters later. Nights, I'm mostly alone. A skeleton clinical crew up on the wards, one charge nurse in the emergency room, and me walking. I carry a ring of keys heavier than a newborn and a garde tour wand, a black baton you touch to little steel buttons bolted to the walls at 41 stations around the building, so that in the morning there's a printout proving a living man actually stood at each spot at the hour he was meant to. Full loop every 2 hours. I know this building in the dark the way you know the inside of your own mouth. And here is the thing I was proudest of. So let me say it plainly now, while I still have the right to. Stripped all the way down, my job is accounting for people. Everyone inside is supposed to be inside. Everyone who left is gone. I close that count every night. In 18 years, I never got it wrong. Not once. Hold on to that. It's the hinge the whole thing swings on. Now, the elevators. There are 3. 2 public, 1 service, a big scarred freight car at the back of the building that the gurneys and the food carts and the dead all ride. Its panel goes G, then 1 through 9, and below G it goes B1 for parking and B2 for the plant and the morgue. That's the bottom. B2 is where the building ends and the bedrock starts. Ask anyone. Ask the blueprints. That first night, the one I just put you inside of, I did what you would do. I looked at the panel. I made myself look. And there was a button lit under B2 that I would have sworn on my life was not there an hour before. No label. Just a dark disk with a ring of light around it, warm, like it had been waiting all this time to be noticed. I told myself the obvious thing. Old freight elevator, worn relay, it overran the bottom and I was seeing a maintenance sub-level, some forgotten mechanical space. Every hospital has dead rooms. I even felt a little foolish for the jump in my chest. I stepped out to have a look because that is also the job, and the doors stayed open behind me, patient, and the corridor was lit. Not emergency lit. Lit. Fluorescent, humming, the floor waxed to that shine only day staff have time to put on a floor. And there was a sign on the wall, old enamel, chipped at the corners. Ward C, and under it an arrow, and under the arrow, in a font they stopped using before I was born. Chronic and convalescent care. Ashmore has no Ward C. I want to be precise, because precision is all I have left. We have towers and wings and units with letters, but there is no Ward C, and there is no chronic care floor, and there has not been one in my lifetime. I have touched every wall in this building with a wand for 18 years. I would have known. I walked it. Of course I walked it. Long corridor, doors on both sides, and the doors were open, and the rooms had beds, and the beds were made. That tight hospital corner you can bounce a coin on, and I remember thinking, with the small relief of a man finding a boring answer, storage, they're storing old beds down here. And then in the fourth room, a woman sitting up in the made bed turned her head toward the hallway and said, "Is it visiting hours yet?" I didn't run. I want that on the record too, though I've stopped being sure whether it was courage or just 18 years of the Count telling me nobody's supposed to be here. Go find out why. She was old. Cardigan over a gown, hair set the way my grandmother set hers, hands folded on the blanket, calm, not frightened of me, which frightened me. Everyone in a hospital at 3 in the morning is at least a little afraid. She wasn't. "Ma'am," I said, "you can't be down here." Which was true, and also, I understand now, the single stupidest thing anyone has ever said out loud. She smiled like I'd said something kind. "My son's coming," she said. "He said he'd come. I don't want to miss him. Could you tell me when it's visiting hours?" At the foot of her bed was a chart, the old kind, a metal clipboard on a hook. I picked it up because touching a normal object felt like grabbing a railing. It was blank. Not blank like new, blank like emptied. The lines were there, ruled and labeled, name, date of birth, admitted, attending, next of kin, and every line was clean. Except she was warm. I could feel the warmth of her off the bed. You don't feel warmth off a memory. I told her I'd check on visiting hours. God help me. I said it to make her feel better, and it did. She settled back like a child promised the light left on, and I walked back to the elevator with my legs not entirely mine, and rode up and stood in the bright, empty lobby and told myself, out loud, that I was tired, that the night shift eats men, that I'd been eaten. There was one other person awake on that floor, a nurse I didn't know, older, in scrubs a style or two behind the ones our people wear now, standing at the far end of the hall like she'd been waiting for the elevator to bring me back up. She didn't ask if I was all right. She said it quiet, the way you'd tell someone the time. You don't have to answer the ones who are waiting, but if you answer them, they learn your name. And once they have your name, they start keeping a bed for you. I asked who she was. She smelled like the old wing, that floor wax and ether smell the new towers don't have. "I used to have your rounds," she said, and she went toward the stairwell, and I let her, because I was tired, and because some part of me did not want to follow that woman into a stairwell at 3 in the morning. Here's the part where a reasonable man does the reasonable thing, and I did it. The next morning before I clocked out, I stayed late and I asked. I asked Denny in facilities. I asked the charge nurse. I asked Ruth in medical records, who has been at Ashmore longer than the parking structure. I said, "Tell me about Ward C. Tell me about the sub-level under B2. And every one of them told me the same thing, in the same slightly bored way you tell someone a thing that's just true. There is no sub-level under B2. There was once an old chronic ward, closed in the 80s. Mothballed, and then during the remediation in 04 they filled it. Poured it. Denny actually laughed and said, "Cal, there's 40 truckloads of concrete under B2. It's why the freight car rides rough. You're standing on it." Ruth pulled the floor plan without my asking, because she's kind, and laid her finger on the empty space below B2 where nothing was drawn, and said, "There's nothing there, hun. There hasn't been since before you started." I asked about the nurse, too. I described her, the old scrubs, the way she smelled like the closed wing, that she'd told me she used to work my floor. The charge nurse pulled the staffing sheet, then pulled it a second time, and told me there had been no float nurse assigned above the 4th floor that whole week. They'd been short. 9 had run on call bells and luck. Then she said, not unkindly, "Cal, security doesn't have nurses. Guards have rounds. Nurses have patients." I hadn't said the word rounds. The woman upstairs had, but I hadn't repeated it to a living soul. The charge nurse handed it back to me anyway, like she'd read it straight off my face, and neither of us reached for it, the way you don't reach for a wire until you're sure it's gone dead. I believed them. That's the thing I need you to feel. I believed them because they had no reason to lie, and I had every reason to be wrong. I went home and slept badly, and came back that night halfway convinced I'd dreamed a flaw. Then I pulled my own tour printout from the shift before, the honest little receipt, the wand prints, the one that proves where I stood, and there, stamped at 3:07 in the morning, was a station number I didn't recognize. Station 42. There are 41 stations in this building. I have touched all 41 for 18 years. There is no Station 42. Somebody had bolted a 40-second button to a wall in a floor that doesn't exist, and at 3:07 in the morning, I had stood in front of it and touched my wand to it, the way I've been trained to prove a man was really there. So I did the only thing left. I went back down, and I'm going to slow here, because this is where I need you to still be with me. Over the next weeks, I went down most nights, and I learned Ward C the way I'd learned the rest of the building. 12 rooms, never all full, never empty. The people in them were old, mostly, though not all. There was a man with a young face and gray in his beard who never spoke, only watched the door, and a heavy-set woman who was always knitting something that never got longer. None of them were sick in any way I could see. None of them were on anything. No lines, no monitors, no oxygen, and the wall behind each bed had the ports and gauges of real care, and every gauge read 0. They were just there, waiting. That was the word my mind kept reaching for and flinching from. Not resting, not recovering. Waiting. And they were, every one of them, expecting someone. The old woman's son, a man who told me his wife was parking the car. She hated the parking here, she'd be up any minute. A woman who asked me, every single night in the same bright voice, whether the doctor had come yet with her results, because her daughter was going to want to know. Her daughter worried. None of them ever got frightened. None of them ever got impatient. They held their calm the way the beds held their corners, tight and made and ready, and it was the most frightening thing I have ever stood inside of. That patience. Because I finally understood it was the patience of people who have already been waiting longer than they know. I went back to the cardigan woman most. I couldn't have told you why at first. Maybe only because she'd been the first face. Maybe because she never asked me for a single thing except the time visiting started. She gave me her son in pieces, a different piece each night, the way you do when all you have is time. He sold farm equipment 2 counties over. He'd had a temper as a boy and grown clean out of it. He'd promised to come straight from the depot. Tall, she said. You'd remember him. He has that walk. And every night she asked if I'd passed him in the lobby. And every night I said soon, he's coming. And every night she settled back happy as a child. It took me longer than I want to admit to hear what I was actually doing down there. Promising a woman that a man who is never coming is just now parking the car, is just down the hall, is tall. You'd know him. I told myself it was mercy. I've stopped being sure mercy and cowardice keep separate rooms inside a man. Every chart was blank. Every wristband, they wore the old paper wristbands, was blank. No names. 12 people, give or take, in the belly of a hospital that swore they weren't there, and not one of them had a name written down anywhere in the world. I started bringing the charts up. Not to steal them, to test them. I'd carry one into the light of B2 and it would be blank there too, so it wasn't the dark. I photographed them on my phone and the photos came out fine, a clear picture of a blank chart, which is somehow worse than no picture at all. I checked the cameras. We have a camera on the freight car and cameras on every floor, feeding the bank of monitors in my office and a hard drive that keeps 30 days. On the freight car feed you can watch me, night after night, step in and press the panel, and the car goes down, and the timestamp on the corner keeps running, and then there's a smear, a few seconds of the picture folding into static, and then I'm stepping back in, going up, every night. The floor between never records. The camera goes down to B2 and stops, loyal to the blueprint, and waits for me to come back up to a world it's allowed to see. And there was one last thing on that drive, and I held it back until now because it's the piece I understand least, and it frightens me worse than the static. The badge system keeps its own record, separate from the cameras. A cold, flat list of every door my card has ever opened, going back to the day they issued it. I pulled mine. The freight car override to the level below B2, the level that is not there, the level that cannot be there. My card has triggered it 409 times. And the first was not the brave night I told you about, the night I stepped out and felt foolish for the jump in my chest. The first was 3 years ago. 3 years. I have been going down to Ward C 2 and 3 nights a week for 3 years, and I remember beginning a few weeks ago. I remember it as new. Whatever that floor does to a chart between one visit and the next, wiping it clean so the work is never finished. It has been doing the same thing to me, lifting 3 years of nights out of me one at a time, and the only reason I know is that a machine counts better than I do. I told you at the start that I never once got the count wrong. I was the miscount. I was the one who was never really accounted for. That's when I stopped sleeping in any real way, and that's when I made the mistake that broke it open. I went looking in the records for what used to be down there. Not the current system. The current system is scrubbed clean, I told you, and everyone believes it. I went to the sub-basement of the records themselves, the dead files, the boxes Ruth's department keeps in a cage on B1 because the state makes you keep them 25 years, and nobody's brave enough to be the one who shreds a medical chart. And I found the night. You may even remember it if you're from anywhere near here. 18 years ago, of February, the Bellwether Bridge came down at the evening rush with a full load on it. I'm not going to describe it. You can look it up, and the number is bad enough sitting by itself. What matters is that every hurt person west of the river came to us, all at once, into a hospital with 41 beds too few, in an ice storm. On a night, the roads to the other hospitals were closing behind every ambulance that made it in. And I was there. That's the part I have to say slowly. 18 years ago, I wasn't security. I was 26 and I was an orderly at Ashmore, which is a fancy word for the man they call when something needs to be moved and it's too heavy or too human for one nurse to move alone. I moved beds. I moved people. That was my whole trade, and I was good at it. And I was on shift the night the bridge came down. Here is what the dead files told me, in 3 different hands across a dozen forms. Some of them mine. When the surge hit and every real bed was full and the hallways were full and they were setting broken people down on the floor of the chapel, somebody with the authority to decide made a decision. The ones who weren't going to make it, the ones a triage nurse marks with a certain color and moves past, and the ones nobody could identify, the ones with no wallet and no face left to know, they needed them out of the way, not abandoned. That was never the word anyone used, or, I truly believe, meant. Moved. Somewhere quiet, out of the light, until the storm broke and the day teams came and there was room to do right by them. There was a floor that could hold them, closed, but the beds were still down there. A chronic ward, Ward C, and they needed men to move them. Strong, fast men who could carry a bed down a freight elevator and not ask questions and not throw up. I was 26 and I could carry anything. I have to break here because that week I broke. The records cage got to be too much air to breathe, and I went down to Ward C the way other men step outside for a cigarette, and the gray-faced man who never spoke was sitting up. He had never once sat up. He watched me come the length of the corridor, and when I stopped at the foot of his bed, he said, in a voice like a door that hasn't moved in years, "You were stronger then." I asked him what he meant. He looked at me the way you look at a man who already knows the answer, and you're only being kind by making him say it. "You carried me down," he said. "You told me someone would come." Then he lay back against the pillow and was finished, maybe forever. And I stood there with a blank chart shaking in my hands and understood that the thing I'd been reading upstairs in the dead files and the thing waiting for me down here were one thing wearing 2 faces, and that one of those faces remembered mine. I made 11 trips. My name is on the transport log 11 times that night, in my own hand, going down. And I checked it 100 times, not once coming back up with anyone. You take them down. You don't bring them up. Somebody would come. I was told a team would come at first light when the roads opened, when the count upstairs stopped climbing. I believed it the way I believed Ruth 18 years later, completely, because the man who told me had no reason to lie and I had every reason to need it to be true. Nobody came at first light. First light, the story had already started to change. By the time the state inspectors and the reporters were in the lobby 3 days later, there had never been a Ward C. There had been a transfer, a heroic, chaotic transfer of overflow patients to facilities across the county. All of them, everyone accounted for. The paperwork a little messy because of the storm, you understand. But everyone moved. Everyone safe. No one left. That's the story that held. That's the story that's still holding in the clean current system, in Ruth's kind, certain finger on the empty floor plan. The concrete came 2 years later, and I'll let you decide for yourself what 40 truckloads of concrete were poured over. And I believe the transfer story too, for 18 years, because I quit 3 weeks after that night, and I never let anyone tell me the details, and I built a whole life on the belief that the people I carried into the dark got carried back out by someone better than me. That's the institutional horror, and it's real, and if that were all of it, I could maybe live in it. But I told you at the start there was a personal thing, and that I'd get to it, and here it is. And I'm sorry, because I've been steering around it the whole time the way I steer around one room down there. My daughter was in the building that night. June, 11 years old. She'd come in that afternoon, before the bridge, before any of it, for the most ordinary thing in the world, a bad appendix. A surgery so routine the surgeon actually said the word routine to my wife in the hall. She was upstairs, recovering in a real bed on a real floor with her name on a real chart, while I was down in the freight car making trips. I'd been up to see her at the start of my shift. She was groggy and cross about the ice chips, and she made me promise to bring her a real Coke when the machine on her floor got refilled. I said I would. Then the bridge came down and the world ended, and I spent the worst night of that hospital's history, being very, very good at my job in the basement. They told me she died of a complication, a bleed, sudden, the kind of thing that can happen after even a routine surgery. And on a normal night, the monitors flag it and a team is there in 90 seconds, and it's a scare and a story you tell later. It wasn't a normal night. The monitors flagged it. I've seen the log now. They flagged it at 3:52 in the morning, and the code team that should have been at her bed in 90 seconds was not at her bed. And by the time anyone came, it was a different kind of night for us than for the strangers on the bridge. I grieved that for 18 years as a thing the storm did, an act of God with a bridge for a hand. I forgave the hospital because how do you not? They were drowning. Everyone was drowning. My little girl was one wave among hundreds. The dead files don't say act of God. The dead files, cross-referenced, time-stamped, are colder than that, and they don't care what I can stand. At 3:52 that morning, the team that should have gone to June's floor was logged instead on the freight elevator, going down. Because at 3:52 that morning, word had come that the state was already asking questions about capacity, and somebody had decided the most urgent thing in the building was not the girl bleeding on 9. It was getting Ward C emptied and quiet and deniable before daylight made it a scandal. They pulled the team to move my patients, my 11, to hide them. And the man on the freight car at 3:52, driving it down, steadying a bed with his own 2 hands while his daughter's monitor screamed 4 floors above him into an empty hall. I've stopped needing to tell you his name. You know it. It's the same man they gave a 20-year service pin to last spring in the cafeteria with a sheet cake. The same man who never got the count wrong. I got the only count that ever mattered wrong by 4 floors and 11 beds, and I didn't even know I was counting. So here is what I did once I understood. I went down looking for her. I'm not proud of the hope. Hope like that is a kind of madness, and I knew it, even while I was doing it, going room to room in Ward C night after night with my flashlight, looking in every made bed, at every calm, waiting face, for an 11-year-old girl who wanted a real Coke. If the dark under the concrete could hold the erased, could hold a woman still waiting for a son and a man whose wife was forever parking the car, then maybe I let myself think. Maybe it held her too. Maybe there was one place left in the world where June was still waiting for me to come up with the Coke I promised, and maybe being 18 years late was better than never coming at all. She isn't there. I checked every room but one. She isn't in any of them, and after a while I understood why, and it's the cruelest logic I have ever had to hold. The people in Ward C are the erased. The ones the hospital swore never existed, unnamed, uncharted, wiped out of the record so completely that the only place left for them to be is a floor that isn't on the map. But June was never erased. June is the opposite. June had a name and a chart, and a headstone and an obituary, and a father who tells people about her. June was recorded. June existed, out loud, in the light, the proper way, and she is exactly as gone as they are. The hospital killed her by writing her down correctly and killed them by scrubbing them out, and both kinds of dead ended up in the same silence, and only one kind gets a bed in the dark to wait in. The recorded don't get to wait. The recorded are just gone. There is one room I never went in. At the end of the corridor, past the 11, there's a 12th room, and the bed in it is made tighter than the others. That coin-bouncing corner, fresh, turned down at one edge like someone's expected. The chart on it is blank like all the rest. And the first week, when I could still ask them things, I asked the old woman with the cardigan whose bed that was, the maid one at the end, and she looked at me with a tenderness I still can't sleep under, and she said, "Oh, that one's not one of ours. That one they kept upstairs. We just keep it made, in case they ever let her come down." I never went in. I have not gone in. You understand that I could. It's 20 steps. I have the flashlight. I have the key to every room in this building. 20 steps and I would know whether the made bed at the end of a floor that doesn't exist is empty, or whether my daughter has been 11 years old in the dark under 40 truckloads of concrete for 18 years, waiting for a father who was always downstairs. So I did the other thing instead, the only thing I know how to do. I've started closing the count. Every night now I bring down a pen. I sit with them, one at a time, and I ask them the things the chart wants to know, the way I should have been asked to 18 years ago and never was. Name. When were you born? Who are you waiting for? The cardigan woman always goes first, because she was first. She gives me her son's name like something she's kept warm in both hands the whole time, and they tell me they've been ready to tell someone for 18 years, and I write it on the blank line in my own hand, the same hand that's on the transport log, and for a moment, while the ink is wet, there is a person written down in the world where there wasn't one. It never lasts. Every night, the charts are blank again. Every night, I start over. I've decided that's all right. Being remembered was never a thing you finish. It's a round you walk. You walk it again and again, because the walking is the whole of it, and I, of all men, should have always known that. I'm telling you all this because I've made a decision, and I want one honest witness who isn't a hospital. Tonight, when I go down, I'm going to the end of the corridor. I filled every blank chart on that floor but one, and a man who prides himself on the count can't leave one bed uncounted forever and call himself honest. So I'm going to open the 12th door, and I'm going to look in the made bed, and I'm going to write on the blank line whatever is or isn't there. And I already know it's the last honest thing I'll ever get to do, because of the two things that can be true when I open that door. I can't survive either one. If the bed is empty, then there is nowhere left in all the world where my daughter is still waiting for me, and I have spent 18 years being comforted by a dark I'm about to switch the light on in. And if the bed is not empty, if she's there, 11, patient, holding her calm the way they all do, asking me at last if I brought the Coke, then I will finally have gotten the count right, and I will never come back up. I check every bed on that floor but the made one. In 18 years, I have never once looked in the made one. Because as long as I don't look, there is still one bed in this hospital that's turned down and waiting for my daughter. And God forgive me. God forgive all of us who were so good at our jobs that night, that made bed in the dark as the only place left in the world where she still has anywhere to be.